A millionaire CEO ordered a late-night pizza and opened the door to two little girls delivering it. What they said next changed his life forever. Mark Ellerton hadn't planned on staying late that night. His meetings had run long, his patience had worn thin, and the only thing he wanted was something simple, warm, and familiar. After years of private chefs and five-star restaurant reservations, there was something oddly comforting about ordering a pizza. No scripts, no etiquette, no expectations, just melted cheese and quiet. So, from his penthouse suite on the 30th floor of the Langford Hotel in Boston, he pulled up the site of a small local pizzeria and ordered a large pepperoni with extra sauce and a side of garlic knots. He didn't think much of it after that. He returned to his laptop, answered a few emails, and poured himself a glass of wine. The suite was elegant, all polished wood and velvet, dimly lit and silent except for the occasional hum of traffic below. 35 floors beneath him, the city buzzed on. But up here, Mark was alone in every sense of the word. It wasn't just the evening. It was a silence he had lived in for years. Success had brought him respect, power, and obscene wealth. But not warmth, not connection. Not the little things he hadn't even realized he missed until lately. He was halfway through his drink when there was a knock on the door. Checking his watch, he raised an eyebrow. That was fast. He walked over, expecting to find a teenager in a branded cap holding a thermal bag. What he saw instead stopped him mid-motion. Standing in the hallway were two little girls, no older than 7, wearing oversized jackets with the logo of the pizza shop he'd ordered from. One of them held a large pizza box with both hands, slightly off-center. The other stood beside her, blue eyes bright but tired. Her breath came in shallow bursts from the cold outside, visible in little clouds against the warm air spilling from the suite. "Your pizza, sir," said the taller girl politely, her voice a touch rehearsed, like someone who'd been told exactly what to say. Mark blinked, frozen by the surrealness of it. He opened the door wider. "Oh, wait, what?" "We're from Maggie's Oven," said the girl with the pizza. "Order number 37. For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply stared at them, confused, concerned, and, deep down, moved. Their hair was damp with melted snow, and their shoes looked too thin for the weather. There were no adults in sight. He looked past them into the hallway, half expecting someone to step out of the elevator or around the corner. But there was no one. Only the two girls, the pizza, and a moment that suddenly felt much heavier than it should have. "You delivered this yourselves?" he asked, keeping his voice low and careful. The girls nodded. "Where's the driver? Where's your mom?" The girl who had spoken first hesitated, then said, "She's at the store. She makes the pizzas. We help deliver them. There's no money for drivers." Mark's heart dropped. He had expected dinner. He got a glimpse into someone's desperation. He stepped aside. "It's freezing. Come inside for a second, okay? Just to warm up." They exchanged a glance. The younger one looked nervous, but the older girl gave a small nod. "Okay, just for a minute." He took the pizza box from her gently and set it on the coffee table. The girls hovered near the doorway, hesitant but shivering. He grabbed 2 bottles of water from the minibar and offered them both seats on the couch. They sat close together, clutching the bottles with small, cold fingers. Mark sat across from them, still unsure of how to process what was happening. These weren't delivery workers. These were children, exhausted, responsible children carrying something far too heavy for their age. And they weren't complaining. They weren't asking for anything. They were simply doing what they thought they had to do. Something stirred in him, a mixture of guilt, protectiveness, and awe. This wasn't a story. It wasn't a photo op. It was 2 little girls standing in front of him, tired but brave, surviving because their mother was doing everything she could, and they were helping her the only way they knew how. He asked them gently, "Can I take you home?" And when the older one nodded, saying softly, "Only if you call Mom first so she doesn't worry," Mark knew without a doubt that this night, which had begun in hunger and routine, was about to change the course of his life forever. Mark drove through unfamiliar streets that night with both hands tightly gripping the steering wheel. The hotel SUV, usually reserved for airport transfers and executive events, had never carried passengers like these before. In the back seat, the 2 girls sat quietly, buckled in and still clutching the bottled waters he had given them. They weren't scared exactly, just cautious, as if they had learned early on that trust was a luxury you give out sparingly. Mark kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror, struck by how composed they were for their age. Most kids would have been giddy from the ride, fidgeting, asking questions, but these two stared out the window silently, like adults with too much on their minds. Before they left the hotel, he had called the number they gave him. Their mother had answered, her voice strained and breathless, muffled by kitchen noise and the clang of metal. The moment he introduced himself and explained who he was, and that her daughters were with him, there was a pause, sharp, terrified, and then tears. She had been working non-stop, and they had taken the delivery without her permission, hoping to help lighten her load. Mark assured her he was bringing them home safely and asked for the address. She gave it hesitantly, with disbelief still thick in her voice, as if the whole situation were part of a dream she hadn't dared imagine. The pizzeria was in Dorchester, an old neighborhood on the edge of the city. Not dangerous, but run down in places, with cracked sidewalks, flickering neon signs, and narrow buildings packed tightly together. When they turned the corner onto the street where the shop stood, Mark saw it immediately. A faded sign above a small storefront read, Maggie's Oven. The windows were fogged from inside, and a single overhead light flickered above the entrance. As he parked, the girls unbuckled themselves and got out before he could open the door. They clearly knew this place. Every step of the path, every sound. He followed them through the front door, the bell overhead jingling as they entered. The warmth of the oven hit him immediately, along with the smell of melted cheese, garlic, and exhaustion. A woman stood at the prep counter in the back, her hair tied in a messy bun, face flushed from heat and stress. She wore a flour-dusted apron and held a metal tray in one hand. When she saw the girls, she dropped it with a clatter. "Lily! Ellie!" she gasped, rushing toward them. They ran to her, and she dropped to her knees, wrapping them both in a frantic hug, pressing kisses to their hair as if she couldn't believe they were real. Mark stepped back slightly, not wanting to intrude, but she looked up at him quickly, her eyes red and full. "You brought them home," she whispered, as if it were the greatest act anyone had ever done for her. "I couldn't let them walk back in the cold," he said softly. "They delivered a pizza to my hotel room." She let out a choked laugh and covered her mouth with one hand. "I didn't even know they left. I was so backed up, I didn't have time to think." Mark nodded. "They told me. They were trying to help you." She stood, pulling the girls up with her. "I'm so sorry. They shouldn't have. This wasn't safe. They know better." Lily looked up at her. "You were tired. We wanted to help." Mark felt something inside him tighten again. This wasn't some dramatic tale or a case of neglect. This was a family on the edge, doing the best they could with what they had. He saw it in the mother's eyes. The sleepless nights, the constant math of what can be paid now and what has to wait. He saw it in the girls' calm, in their willingness to carry weight that shouldn't be theirs. "I'm Mark," he said, offering his hand. "Mark Ellerton." She shook it, eyes widening slightly. "The Mark Ellerton?" He smiled faintly. "Apparently, yes. I've seen your face in the business section. I thought it was some kind of mistake when you called." "Not a mistake," he said. "Just a strange night. And a very unexpected delivery." She laughed again, softer this time. "I'm Megan, and I'm grateful. More than I can say." He looked around the shop. It was clean but worn. The counters were old, the walls patched with signs and faded photos. The oven buzzed constantly. There were only 2 tables inside for customers. A handwritten chalkboard listed the menu above the register. "Do you run this by yourself?" he asked. Megan nodded. "Most days, yeah. I've got one girl who helps with prep, but it's mostly just me. My husband," she paused, her voice catching. "He passed away 3 years ago. Stroke. I used the life insurance to open this place. It was his dream. I'm just trying to keep it going." Mark didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, really looked, at the way she stood protectively in front of her girls, at the tired pride in her posture, at the way her hands trembled from fatigue but kept moving. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," he said finally. Megan gave a small, weary shrug. "I didn't think I had a choice." Mark looked at the girls, who were now sitting at a table, splitting a breadstick between them. Then he looked back at Megan. "Maybe you do." He didn't know yet what he meant by that, but something in him had already decided that he wouldn't walk away from this. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Because sometimes, the most unexpected deliveries come not in a box, but in the form of people who remind you what you've forgotten. How to care, how to see, how to stay. Mark returned to the hotel that night, unable to think about anything else. His phone buzzed with emails, texts from investors, reminders about the morning's meetings, but he ignored them all. The image of Megan in that small kitchen, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, trying to run a business with her bare hands. It stayed with him. So did the girls, sitting quietly at the table, acting more like tiny adults than children, their lives already shaped by necessity. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled into something more important than any merger or deal. He'd built companies, overseen teams of hundreds, but he had never seen resilience like that in a corner pizza shop on a side street no one ever wrote about. The next morning, while the sun was still low over Boston's skyline, Mark sat at the desk in his suite with a legal pad and a coffee that had long gone cold. He began sketching out numbers, not business models, not projections for his own firm, but estimates for equipment upgrades, part-time labor costs, website design, delivery logistics. It had started as curiosity, but it quickly became something more focused, more driven. He didn't want to buy Megan's business or turn it into a franchise. He just wanted to help her breathe, give her a system that didn't crush her, give the girls their childhoods back. He called her late in the morning, unsure if she'd even pick up, but she did. Her voice was cautious, polite. He asked if she had time to meet. She hesitated, then said yes. That afternoon, he returned to Maggie's oven. The place was a little busier, a few neighborhood customers grabbing slices and chatting near the front. Megan looked surprised to see him, but not cold. She wiped her hands on a towel and met him near the back counter. "You came back," she said, her voice a little skeptical. "I told you I might," he replied. "I have an idea." He pulled out the notepad and showed her the pages, walking her through everything he'd mapped out. He talked about setting up an online ordering system so she could stop taking phone calls mid-prep. He explained how she could automate some of the deliveries by using local college students looking for part-time income. He pointed out that a used double-deck oven wouldn't cost much, but would double her output and cut her stress in half. He even offered to handle the website and marketing costs himself, anonymously if she preferred. Megan listened in silence, arms folded, brow furrowed. When he finished, there was a long pause. He expected resistance, pride, a refusal, but she surprised him. "You really thought all this through," she said finally. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Your daughters shouldn't be delivering pizza. You shouldn't be working yourself to collapse. You deserve better tools." She smiled, faint and tired. "I don't want charity, Mark. It's not charity, it's respect. For what you've built. For what you're carrying." She looked down, then back at him. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing," he said without hesitation. "No shares, no branding, no partnership. I just want to see you succeed. For your sake. For theirs." That last part, for theirs, seemed to strike something in her. She nodded slowly, clearly still wary, but also visibly relieved. She was used to doing things alone, to shouldering everything without complaint. But deep down, she was also exhausted. Maybe this was the first time someone offered help without an agenda. Over the next hour, they went over the plan again in more detail. Lily and Ellie peeked in from the back room, whispering and giggling, clearly more relaxed this time. When they saw Mark, Ellie waved with the same tiny hand that had held the pizza box the night before. Before he left, Megan said something that stayed with him all day. "I didn't think people like you saw people like me," she said. "I didn't either," Mark replied honestly. "But now that I have, I can't unsee it." He walked out of the shop feeling like something inside him had cracked open, not in a painful way, but in the way that sunlight breaks through after a long, gray winter. He didn't know what would come of it yet, but he knew this. He was going to help her. Not because he had to, because for the first time in a long time, something felt real. The following week unfolded with a quiet kind of urgency, the kind that comes when something fragile begins to take root, and everyone involved is too scared to breathe too hard in case it all falls apart. Mark kept his promise. He wasn't just generous, he was methodical. Every morning before his corporate meetings, he carved out 2 hours for Megan's business. He worked from spreadsheets and notes scribbled on napkins, researching small business equipment suppliers, drafting a simple website framework, reaching out to local university job boards for part-time delivery drivers. He called it light consulting, but in truth, he hadn't thrown himself into anything this personally in years. Megan was still hesitant. She never asked him for more than what had already been offered. And every time he showed up to her pizzeria with a new solution, like a credit card reader that actually worked or a food-safe shelving unit she desperately needed but never prioritized, she would glance at him like she wasn't sure whether to thank him or challenge him. There was pride in her still. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to work. She wanted dignity. Mark respected that more than he could say. He made sure every suggestion came with the room for her input, and every step forward was something they agreed on together. She wasn't just the owner of Maggie's oven, she was its center, and he had no intention of changing that. They fell into an unexpected routine. He would visit the shop in the afternoons when traffic died down, checking in, helping where he could, and slowly becoming something more than just a benefactor. He ran the register when it got too crowded, rolled dough clumsily beside Megan when she was short-staffed, and once even delivered an order himself when one of the new drivers canceled last minute. Word started to spread around the neighborhood. People came by not just for the pizza, which was genuinely good, but because something in the air had shifted. There was life in the place. Hope. One night, after closing, Mark stayed behind to help Megan scrub the counters and stack the chairs. The girls were in the back playing with leftover dough, giggling softly. Megan had flour on her cheek and a strand of hair stuck to her forehead. She looked tired, but not the same kind of tired she had worn the week before. This was something different. Earned fatigue, not survival. "You're not what I expected," she said as she wiped down the front display case. "Because I wear a suit," he joked. "Because most people who wear suits don't come back. They drop in, take pictures, say nice things, then they leave." Mark set down the chair he was folding and met her gaze. "I'm not here to be a story, Megan." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then, what are you here to be?" He hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud made it real. "I don't know. Maybe someone who shows up when it matters." They didn't talk after that for a while, but they didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like agreement, like a shared understanding that this wasn't something either of them could have predicted, but neither wanted to push away. Later that week, when the new oven arrived, Megan cried. Not loudly, not in a way anyone else saw. Mark found her in the storage room, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve, pretending it was just dust. He didn't say anything, just stood there for a second, then quietly went back to unloading boxes. It wasn't about the oven, not really. It was about what it meant, that someone believed in her, that someone thought her work mattered enough to be worth more than duct tape and worn-out parts. That night, Ellie drew a picture on a napkin, 3 people and a big red heart in the middle. She handed it to Mark as he was leaving. That's you, Mommy and me," she said proudly. "Lily said you're part of the pizza team now." Mark smiled and folded the napkin carefully before putting it in his coat pocket. He didn't take it out for weeks. Every time he reached into that pocket, felt the crinkled paper between his fingers, he remembered that what he was building here wasn't just a better business. It was a bridge, something that connected who he used to be with who he might still become, something worth staying for. It was only a matter of time before the outside world caught on. At first, it started small. A curious customer asking why a man in designer shoes was sweeping floors in a local pizzeria. Then, someone recognized Mark from a business magazine feature and took a photo of him behind the counter, handing a pizza box to an elderly woman. The photo ended up on social media with a caption that read, "Is that Mark Ellerton working at a pizza shop?" The post went viral overnight. People were fascinated, confused, and quick to speculate. The man who had once led a Fortune 100 company was now, inexplicably, tossing dough in a neighborhood restaurant next to 2 school-aged girls and a single mother. Within 2 days, reporters began calling. Within 4, a news crew showed up at Maggie's oven without warning. Megan was in the middle of preparing a large order when a man with a camera and a microphone walked in and asked, "Is it true that a billionaire has taken over your pizzeria?" She froze, hands covered in flour, then looked at Mark with something like panic in her eyes. He stepped forward calmly and escorted the reporter outside. He spoke with quiet authority, asking that they not exploit the story for clicks. "This isn't about me," he told them, "and it's not about some feel-good headline. It's about a woman who's built something real, and I'm just here to help her keep it standing." But the damage had already been done. By the following morning, 3 separate blogs had published articles speculating on his motives. Some painted him as a fallen mogul trying to redeem himself. Others accused him of using Megan's story to polish his public image. One cruel headline read, "From boardroom to breadcrumbs, is this the end of Mark Ellerton?" His name was trending, but not in a way he had ever wanted. Clients from his consulting firm began pulling away. One of his longtime investors called and advised him to either go full nonprofit or disappear for a while. It wasn't about whether what he was doing was good. It was about optics, reputation. Mark had seen this kind of spin 100 times before, but never from the inside. He'd watched it break people, turn them into versions of themselves, that no longer recognized their own reflections. But this time, he didn't feel fear. He felt anger. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but something slower and colder, because he finally saw how hollow the world he'd spent his life building could be. When he told Megan what was happening, she went quiet. They were standing in the kitchen after hours, the girls already asleep in the back office. She stirred a pot slowly, lips pressed tight, and then finally said, "You don't owe us this. If you need to step away, I'd understand." Mark didn't answer right away. He walked over, leaned against the counter, and looked at her like he had never looked at a business partner, or an associate, or even a friend before. "If I walk away now, I go back to being safe, but empty. If I stay, maybe everything I've done before, this means something." She turned to face him, her arms crossed, but her voice gentle. "Then stay, but don't do it out of guilt. Do it because you believe in what we're building." "I do," he said quietly. "Every piece of it." Later that week, when another journalist came knocking, Megan was ready. She stepped outside, camera pointed at her, and spoke with calm conviction. "This is my business. I built it with my hands, my grief, and my hope. Mark isn't my savior. He's my partner in effort, and he's the only one who showed up when everyone else walked past." That video clip got shared more than any of the previous stories. People started seeing the truth beneath the narrative. Not all of them, but enough. Donations began arriving from strangers who had read Megan's words. Someone sent 10 brand new delivery bags. A bakery down the block offered to share their delivery drivers. A local print shop offered free menus. It wasn't a flood, but it was something. It was proof that even in a cynical world, honesty still echoed. The media frenzy eventually faded. The reporters stopped calling. The attention moved on, as it always does. But something had shifted permanently. Maggie's Oven was no longer just a pizza shop. It was a symbol of resilience, of unexpected kindness, of two lives that had crossed in the most ordinary and extraordinary way. Mark lost clients, sure, but he gained something else. And as he walked into the shop each morning, greeted by the smell of yeast and garlic, by the sound of Ellie laughing in the back, by the sight of Megan wiping down the counters with the same quiet fire in her eyes, he knew he had traded up. The first snowfall of the season arrived quietly, coating the streets outside Maggie's Oven in soft white layers before most people were even awake. Mark stood at the front window that morning, holding a cup of coffee and watching the flakes settle on the narrow sidewalk. Inside, the kitchen was already warm, the ovens humming, the scent of rising dough mixing with cinnamon from the rolls Megan had started experimenting with. He had learned by now that winter was the hardest season for small restaurants, especially one that depended so much on walk-in customers. But this year, something felt different. There was a kind of strength in the air, not loud or flashy, but steady, like a new foundation had been quietly poured under the chaos. Megan walked in from the back, wrapped in a thick cardigan over her apron, and gave him a tired smile. "It's going to be a slow day. People stay in when it snows like this." Mark nodded but didn't look away from the window. "Let them stay in. We'll feed the ones who come." He said it without any trace of worry, and Megan noticed. Something in his voice had shifted over the past few weeks. He wasn't just showing up anymore. He belonged here, and he knew it. The girls came in later, bundled in oversized coats, boots dragging snow across the tiled floor. They were laughing, cheeks red, arms full of school books and homework. Megan shot them a look about the floor, but didn't say anything. She never had to. There was a rhythm between them now, a language built on glances and gestures, the kind of understanding that forms when people survive together. That afternoon, the power flickered. A transformer down the block had gone out, and half the street lost electricity. The oven cut off mid-bake, the lights dimmed, and for a moment, panic set in. Megan looked at Mark, and he looked at the girls, who had already gone still. He stepped toward the back room, where they kept a generator, one he had insisted on installing weeks ago, just in case. He got it started within minutes, and the hum of power returned. The lights came back on, the ovens reignited, and the tension broke with a collective exhale. "You saved us," Megan said, brushing flour from her hands. Mark just shrugged. That's what partners are for. It wasn't long after that day that Mark stopped going back to his corporate office entirely. He hadn't officially quit. He still answered emails, still advised on strategy from time to time, but his desk gathered dust, and no one questioned it anymore. His presence in the shop had gone from unusual to expected. and the space that had once been purely Megan's now carried traces of both of them. A new chalkboard menu with daily specials, a small bookshelf near the counter where Ellie had convinced him to let customers donate and borrow children's books. A second register to cut down on wait times, which Lily had learned to operate with stunning accuracy. One evening after closing, Megan and Mark sat in the small dining area, surrounded by the quiet mess of a busy day. The chairs were up, the floors swept, the cash counted and locked away. The girls had fallen asleep on a pile of coats in the back room, curled together like kittens. Megan had her feet propped on a stool and was sipping tea. Mark sat across from her, sketching something on a napkin. It wasn't business. It was a snowman wearing a chef's hat. "I never thought I'd get here," Megan said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. "To this kind of peace. To this kind of help." He looked up. "You didn't get here alone, but you built this. You made the space for it." She met his eyes. "So did you." There was a long silence between them, but not an awkward one. It was a pause filled with something unspoken, something slowly becoming undeniable. She stood first, walked over, and sat beside him instead of across. He didn't move away. She leaned against his shoulder, and he let his head rest gently against hers. They stayed that way for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge, the distant sound of wind brushing against the windows, and the soft, steady breathing of the girls asleep in the next room. Nothing was official. Nothing was declared. But in that stillness, it became clear. This was no longer about pizza or business or even second chances. It was about choosing each other, not just in moments of crisis, but in the steady days that followed, the ordinary ones, the quiet ones, the ones that asked not for grand gestures but for presence. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Some beginnings happen not with fireworks, but with silence shared between two people who finally feel safe enough to stop pretending they don't need anyone. Spring crept into the city gently, melting the snow and washing the streets in soft light. At Maggie's oven, the sun now spilled through the front windows in golden stripes, catching on the flour dust that always hung faintly in the air. The new season brought more than just warmth. It brought change, though not in any dramatic way. Things were quieter, steadier. Days passed with their own rhythm. The shop opened on time, orders came in, deliveries went out, and at night the tables were cleaned and the lights dimmed one by one. It was the kind of consistency Megan hadn't known for years, and she had Mark to thank for that. He never claimed credit, never tried to take the spotlight. He just kept showing up, morning after morning, evening after evening, like he had always belonged there. Lily and Ellie had started calling him Mark with a new softness in their voices. Not like he was a stranger or even a guest, but something else, something closer. He helped them with homework when the shop slowed down, using napkins as scratch paper for math problems and spelling lists. On Saturdays, he sometimes picked them up from school events if Megan got stuck behind the oven. The girls didn't question it anymore. Neither did the regular customers, many of whom had grown used to seeing the once mysterious CEO wiping tables or restocking napkins. He was just part of the place now, like the squeaky front door or the smell of baking crust that never quite left his clothes. One afternoon in late April, Megan was rearranging shelves in the storage room when she found the old photo of her and her late husband. It had been tucked behind a box of outdated menus, the frame dusty, the corners bent. She held it for a long time. His eyes smiled back at her with that familiar mix of pride and exhaustion she remembered so well. For a moment, guilt washed over her. Not because of Mark, but because of how long it had been since she allowed herself to feel something for someone new. She hadn't been ready. Until now. She placed the photo back in the box and walked out front, where Mark was talking to a supplier on the phone, half listening to Ellie, who was insisting he try one of her new recipes involving pickles and cheese. Megan stood there a moment, just watching them. There was no grand revelation, no flash of emotion, just quiet certainty. She didn't need saving, but she had needed someone to stand beside her, and somehow, this man who once lived in boardrooms had become that person. That evening, as they closed up, Megan sat with Mark at the corner table near the window. She told him about the photo, about the way she used to feel stuck in two different lives, the one she had lost and the one she was trying to build. He listened without interrupting, his fingers laced loosely on the table, his eyes calm. When she finally paused, he said softly, "You're not leaving one behind. You're honoring it by moving forward." She didn't cry, she didn't need to. Instead, she reached out and touched his hand, her thumb brushing lightly over his knuckles. He turned his palm upward and held hers without question. For the first time in years, Megan didn't feel divided. She felt whole. Over the next few weeks, something unspoken settled between them. They didn't call it anything. There were no declarations, no labels. But there were more shared glances, quiet laughter in the middle of busy shifts, lingering touches when passing in the kitchen. The girls noticed too. One night at dinner, Lily asked casually, "If you and Mom get married, can we still call you Mark?" Ellie added, "Or maybe Pizza Dad?" Mark nearly choked on his water, while Megan laughed so hard she had to set down her fork. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," she said, wiping her eyes. But the look she gave Mark after told him everything he needed to know. That same night, after the girls went to bed, Mark and Megan stood by the front door locking up. Outside, the spring rain had started falling, light and steady. She leaned her head against his shoulder and sighed. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, "but I know it feels like home." He didn't try to define it either. He just wrapped an arm around her and whispered, "That's good enough for me." And for the first time since the night she buried her husband, and since the day Mark ordered that single pizza, Megan let herself believe that maybe love didn't always arrive the way you expected. Sometimes it walked in late, with flour on its sleeves, a quiet heart, and no need for rescue. Summer came to Boston with its usual unpredictability. Days of blistering heat followed by cool evenings and sudden downpours. The city shifted into its more relaxed pace, and so did the rhythm inside Maggie's oven. The steady chaos of winter had softened into something smoother, and the once frantic shop now felt like a well-rehearsed song. Customers lined up out the door most afternoons, not just for the food, but for the atmosphere. The place had grown into something more than a restaurant. It was a meeting ground, a safe space, a home to those who walked in hungry for more than a slice. Mark had become a fixture there in every sense. He still dressed sharply, old habits die hard. But there were days he wore flour like a badge of honor. He stopped noticing when customers whispered or stared. He didn't flinch when people recognized him. The scandal that once threatened his reputation had faded, replaced by quiet respect. Not because of his past achievements, but because of the work he did now. Honest work. Tired, messy, often unnoticed, but deeply real. He had learned how to move through the kitchen without bumping into Megan. He'd memorized the girls' favorite songs and played them during closing. He knew which spices Megan kept in unmarked jars, and how she liked her coffee only after noon. He also knew that none of this would have made sense in his old life. That version of him had been impressive. This version felt alive. Lily had turned 8, and they threw her a birthday party in the shop after closing one Saturday. The tables were decorated with paper flowers Megan and Ellie had made, and Mark had somehow managed to get a magician from a nearby theater to perform for free. There were streamers made of pizza boxes and a homemade cake that leaned a little to one side but still tasted like magic. Half the neighborhood showed up. For the first time in a long time, Megan didn't look tired. She looked full of joy, of laughter, of gratitude. Later that night, as they cleaned up, she found Mark sitting alone at the back table, staring at one of the birthday drawings Lily had made. "It's us," he said when she joined him. "Me, you, the girls, and the oven. She even drew the dough hook." Megan smiled. "She's observant." Then she sat down beside him, not on the opposite side of the table, but right next to him, their shoulders touching. He looked at her more seriously this time. "Do you think this could really last?" She didn't hesitate. "It already has. The rest is just more days." Soon after, they made it official, not with fanfare or a dramatic announcement, but with quiet agreement. Mark sold his remaining shares in his old firm and used part of the money to open a second Maggie's Oven in a nearby neighborhood that had lost all its small businesses during the pandemic. This time, Megan wasn't just the name on the window. She was the face in every local feature, the voice in every radio interview. Mark stood beside her, but never in front. He managed logistics and staff and contracts, but the vision was always hers. And it worked, because they had built it not from ambition, but from need. Not from a hunger for profit, but from love. The girls thrived too. Lily wrote a school essay titled, "My Family Owns a Pizza Shop, and It Changed the World." Ellie began inventing recipes, most of which were barely edible. But Megan kept every single note she scribbled on napkins or receipts. They no longer came to the shop because they had to. They came because it was fun, because it was family. One afternoon, Megan and Mark sat on a bench outside the shop as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows on the pavement. The day had been long, and their hands were still sticky from prepping dough. Mark had his sleeves rolled up, a habit that had once made him uncomfortable but now felt second nature. Megan leaned against him, eyes closed, a small smile on her face. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The boardrooms, the flights, the other life?" Mark thought for a moment before answering. "I miss the illusion that it all mattered. But this," he looked at the shop, at the chalkboard sign they let Ellie decorate, at the bike Lily had parked by the back door, at Megan's hand in his. "This is what matters." They sat there until the streetlights flickered on, not saying much more. Sometimes words felt too small for the kind of peace they had built together. It had taken time, loss, and more than one unexpected delivery to bring them here. But they had arrived, not at a finish line, but at a place to begin again. A place where love looked like flour in your hair and laughter in the kitchen and tiny hands drawing big hearts on napkins. And somewhere in the city, someone else placed a pizza order, without knowing that every once in a while, what shows up at your door changes everything. As the author of this story, I believe the ending reflects something often forgotten in both fiction and real life. That real transformation doesn't come from grand gestures or sudden twists of fate, but from small, consistent choices rooted in empathy and presence. Mark didn't save Megan. He chose to stand beside her. Megan didn't ask to be rescued. She fought for her dignity every step of the way. And the beauty of their journey lies in how they met not through power or status, but through vulnerability, his quiet hunger for purpose, and her relentless fight to survive. The story ends not with a wedding or some dramatic declaration, but with something far more powerful. Two people creating a life built from shared burdens, laughter, trust, and everyday moments that matter. That, to me, is the most profound kind of happy ending. One that isn't about perfection, but about choosing each other, even when it would be easier to walk away.